Right now, someone is standing in a pharmacy spending money they barely have on a bottle of pills that was invented in a laboratory sometime in the last 50 years. They trust it because it has a brand name on the label, and a doctor in a white coat recommended it, and that is what we have all been taught to do. Trust the new, distrust the old, and forget that anything existed before the modern age of medicine. But here is what the wellness industry and the pharmaceutical companies do not want you to think about. Jesus of Nazareth walked this earth 2,000 years ago, and in the pages of Scripture he named specific herbs by name. Not as decorations and not as cooking ingredients, but as things valuable enough to tithe, which in the ancient world meant they were valuable enough to give to God. When Jesus named an herb, it was not casual. In the culture of first-century Galilee, tithing was sacred, and you gave 10% of your most valuable possessions. The fact that Jesus called out herbs like mint and dill and cumin and rue in the context of tithing tells us something critical about these plants. They were treasured. They were currency. They were medicine. They were life. And the most extraordinary thing is happening right now, in research laboratories around the world, where scientists are spending millions of dollars studying these exact plants, running clinical trials and publishing peer-reviewed papers, and arriving at the same conclusions that ancient people already knew thousands of years ago. Stay with me, because herb number 4 on this list was present at the most sacred moments in all of Scripture, present at the first Passover, and present at the crucifixion itself. And herb number 1 is so common that billions of people cook with it every single day without realizing they are holding one of the most potent cardiovascular medicines ever documented by modern science. By the end of this video, you will never look at your garden or your kitchen or your local market the same way again. These are not old wives' tales, and these are not folk remedies. These are plants that Scripture named and history validated and science confirmed. Let us begin. Herb number 7, mint. We start with mint because this is the herb that proves everything we are about to talk about is real. In the book of Matthew, chapter 23, verse 23, Jesus looked directly at the Pharisees and said these words, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, including mint and dill and cumin." He was not praising them for tithing these herbs, and he was making a point about justice and mercy, but in doing so he revealed something we need to stop and appreciate. Mint was valuable enough in first-century Galilee to be formally tithed to the temple, and this was not a casual herb. This was a plant that people protected and cultivated and gave to God. Now let us talk about what science has discovered about this same plant. Mint contains a remarkable compound called rosmarinic acid, and most people have never heard of this compound, but the research around it is extraordinary. Rosmarinic acid is a polyphenol, which is a class of plant compounds that modern nutritional science has identified as among the most powerful antioxidants in existence. But rosmarinic acid does something specific that sets it apart from other antioxidants, because it actively stops the production of inflammatory chemicals in the body called leukotrienes. And those are the same chemicals that cause the swelling and congestion and misery of seasonal allergies. A clinical study published in the journal Phytotherapy Research gave participants with seasonal allergic rhinitis a rosmarinic acid supplement for 21 days, and the result was a significant reduction in nasal symptoms and itchy eyes. And immune cell activity, all of that without the drowsiness that comes with antihistamine drugs. The researchers concluded that rosmarinic acid represented a viable natural alternative for allergy management. But that is not all mint does. The menthol in mint is the compound that gives it that distinctive cooling sensation, and it has been shown to relax the smooth muscle of the gastrointestinal tract, which is why peppermint oil capsules have become one of the most studied natural treatments for irritable bowel syndrome. A 2019 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology reviewed multiple randomized controlled trials and concluded that peppermint oil was significantly more effective than placebo for reducing irritable bowel syndrome symptoms, including abdominal pain and bloating and discomfort. and some trials showed it performing comparably to common prescription antispasmodic drugs with a fraction of the side effects. Mint also contains compounds that have demonstrated antimicrobial activity against bacteria, including E. coli and Staph aureus and Helicobacter pylori, which is the bacteria responsible for most stomach ulcers. Now here is the part that makes this channel different from every other health video you have ever watched. We are not just going to tell you what these herbs do, because we are also going to tell you how to grow them yourself. And that is because the most powerful pharmacy in history was not a building, it was a garden. Mint is simultaneously one of the easiest and most aggressive plants you will ever grow, so plant it in a pot rather than directly in the ground. Because if you plant mint in open soil, it will spread and take over everything around it. Use a medium-sized pot with good drainage, and mint prefers partial shade to full sun with moderate watering. It will grow year-round in warm climates and regrow after every cutting, and every time you cut it back, it becomes bushier and more productive. One small pot of mint will give your family more than they can ever use, and you can dry the leaves or brew them as tea, or add them to water, or consume them fresh, because the medicinal compounds are present whether the mint is fresh, dried. The Pharisees counted this plant among their most valuable possessions, and 2,000 years later, clinical researchers are publishing papers confirming exactly why. Herb number 6. Dill. Dill appears in the same verse, named by Jesus in the same breath as mint, and placed in the same category of plants, worth tithing, and worth protecting, and worth giving to God. But the story of dill goes back even further than first-century Galilee. The Egyptians documented dill as a medicinal herb as far back as 3,000 years before Christ, which makes it one of the oldest written records of any plant being used for healing. Egyptian physicians prescribed dill specifically for soothing pain and calming digestive disturbance, and the Greeks used it extensively for insomnia, considering it a plant of calm and rest. In ancient Greece, athletes rubbed dill on their skin before competition, believing it gave them strength. And then thousands of years after all of that, Jesus named it as something precious enough to give to God. Here is what the research actually shows about this herb. Dill seeds contain a class of compounds called monoterpenes, specifically one called D-limonene. And these compounds have attracted serious scientific attention for their ability to activate a critical detoxification enzyme in the body called glutathione S-transferase. This enzyme is essentially the body's internal neutralizer, because when foreign compounds enter your system, including environmental toxins and carcinogens and pollutants, this enzyme binds to them and flags them for elimination. Research funded by the National Cancer Institute has specifically investigated monoterpenes from herbs like dill for their role in cancer prevention, not as a cure, but as a biological protective mechanism that the body uses to defend itself. Dill seeds are also extraordinarily mineral-dense, and a single tablespoon of dill seeds contains meaningful amounts of calcium and manganese and iron, which makes it one of the most nutrient-concentrated herbs available. For communities where dairy is not a primary food source, dill seeds represent a significant and often overlooked source of bone-supporting minerals. Dill has also demonstrated significant antibacterial activity in laboratory studies, and research has shown dill seed extract to be effective against several strains of bacteria that are increasingly resistant to conventional antibiotics. Antibiotic resistance is one of the most serious public health challenges of the 21st century, and the idea that a plant named by Jesus 2,000 years ago may hold compounds relevant to solving that crisis is one of the most quietly remarkable stories in contemporary science. Dill is one of the fastest-growing herbs you can plant, and from seed to first harvest takes approximately 40 to 60 days. Plant dill seeds directly in the ground because it does not transplant well due to its deep taproot, and choose a location with full sun and well-drained soil. In hot climates, dill will bolt quickly and go to seed, which is actually exactly what you want because the seeds are the most medicinally powerful part of the plant. Once it goes to seed, collect the seeds and dry them and store them, and the plant will also self-seed, meaning it drops seeds into the soil, and new plants emerge the following season without any effort from you. Plant dill once in a good location, and it will feed your garden and your medicine cabinet for years. The Egyptians were writing about this herb before the pyramids were complete, and Jesus named it 3,000 years later, and science is now catching up to what both of them already knew. Herb number 5. Cumin. Here is a fact that most people have never been told about cumin. In the ancient world, this herb was so valuable that the Romans used it as currency and tax collectors accepted cumin as payment. It sat in sealed jars in tombs alongside gold, because the Egyptians believed it would be needed in the afterlife, and Jesus placed it, in that same verse in Matthew chapter 23, as the third herb he named, treating it as something precious enough to tithe and precious enough to give to God. The active compound in cumin that has attracted the most scientific attention is called thymoquinone, and a 2017 systematic review and meta-analysis published in a peer-reviewed journal analyzed 11 randomized controlled clinical trials that looked at the effect of cumin supplementation on metabolic markers. The findings were significant because cumin supplementation was shown to reduce fasting blood glucose levels and reduce total cholesterol and reduce triglycerides. And in some of the trials, the blood sugar reductions were comparable to those produced by metformin, which is the most widely prescribed diabetes medication in the world. Not identical to it and not a replacement for it, but comparable in magnitude. And that is a remarkable finding for a herb that people have been cooking with for 5,000 years. Thymoquinone has also been studied extensively for its anti-inflammatory properties, and chronic inflammation is now understood by medical science to be the underlying driver of most of the major diseases of modern life, including cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease, and many cancers. The ability of cumin compounds to reduce inflammatory markers in the body is therefore not a minor or cosmetic benefit, but a fundamental health mechanism. Beyond thymoquinone, cumin is rich in iron, and a single teaspoon of cumin seeds contains approximately 1.4 milligrams of iron, which represents a meaningful portion of the daily recommended intake. Iron deficiency remains the most common nutritional deficiency in the world, affecting billions of people, and the people of the ancient world, who ate cumin daily, were protecting themselves from anemia without ever using that word. Cumin requires a long, hot growing season of at least 120 days of warm weather to mature fully, and it is a plant that was born in the heat of the Middle East and thrives in hot, dry climates. Plant cumin seeds directly in the ground in full sun with well-drained, slightly sandy soil and water regularly, but do not overwater because cumin is drought-tolerant once established. The plant grows to about 30 centimeters tall and produces delicate white or pink flowers that eventually become the seed heads, and you should harvest when the seeds turn brown and begin to dry on the plant. One plant produces hundreds of seeds, and 10 plants will give your family more cumin than you can consume in a year. Civilizations built their economies around this herb, and your body, it turns out, was built to need it. Herb number 4. Hyssop. Stop everything for a moment, because this is the herb that should change the way you read the Bible entirely. Hyssop appears at the most critical, and the most sacred, and the most defining moments in all of Scripture. Go to the book of Exodus, where God is preparing the Israelites for the Passover, the night that will define their identity as a people for all of history. And the instruction God gives Moses is specific. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood of the lamb, and apply it to the doorposts of your house. The hyssop branch is the instrument of protection, and the hyssop branch is what stands between life and death on that night. Now go to the very end of the gospel story where Jesus is on the cross and he says he is thirsty. A soldier takes a sponge soaked in wine vinegar and lifts it to his lips on a hyssop stalk, and the plant that marked the beginning of Israel's liberation is present at the moment of humanity's redemption. Hyssop frames the entire biblical story from Exodus to Calvary, and it is not background detail because it was chosen deliberately both times. In the ancient world, hyssop was chosen for these moments because of what people knew it could do and what they knew science has now confirmed. Hyssop contains a volatile oil called pinocampone, along with several other active compounds, including ursolic acid and rosmarinic acid. And research published in the journal Phytotherapy Research demonstrated that hyssop extract showed significant antiviral activity against herpes simplex virus type 1. That is one of the most persistent and widespread viral infections in human history, affecting an estimated 67% of the global population under 50, according to the World Health Organization. The mechanism involves hyssop compounds interfering with the virus's ability to attach to and enter human cells. Hyssop also contains compounds that act as expectorants, meaning they help loosen and expel mucus from the respiratory tract, which is why hyssop tea has been used for centuries in the treatment of coughs and bronchitis and respiratory infections. Medieval European healers used hyssop specifically for lung complaints, and researchers studying natural expectorants today keep finding themselves arriving at the same plant. Hyssop is a perennial, which is one of the most valuable words in gardening because it means you plant it once, and it comes back every single year without replanting. Hyssop thrives in dry, rocky, poor soil with excellent drainage and full sun, and it is drought-tolerant and actually prefers not to be overwatered. It grows to about 60 centimeters tall and produces beautiful purple or blue or white flower spikes that bloom in summer. And these flowers attract bees and other pollinators, which means a hyssop plant in your garden improves the productivity of every other flowering plant around it. Prune it back after flowering to keep it bushy and productive, and a single hyssop plant will live and produce for many years. God chose this plant for the first Passover, and the same plant appeared at the cross. And if a herb is significant enough to appear at both the beginning and the end of the greatest story ever told, it is worth growing in your garden. If you are watching this and starting to realize that everything you need has already been provided, then this channel is for you, because the most sophisticated medicine cabinet ever assembled is not in a hospital or a pharmacy, but in a biblical garden. Hit the like button right now and subscribe so you never miss what we put out, because we are just past the halfway point, and the next 3 herbs may be the most important ones yet. Herb number 3, rue. The book of Luke, chapter 11, verse 42. Jesus is speaking again, and once more he names a specific herb in the context of tithing. Rue. The Greeks called rue the herb of grace, and they did not choose that name casually, because in Greek culture grace meant something bestowed from above, a gift that came from beyond ordinary human provision. They looked at this plant and saw something that did not feel like it should belong in the ordinary world. Rue was hung over doorways in ancient homes to ward off disease, and judges in medieval English courts placed bundles of rue on their benches when prisoners were brought before them because they understood that rue repelled the insects and the airborne pathogens that prisoners carried from diseased jails. This practice was so established that bunches of herbs, including rue, are still carried in certain British legal ceremonies today, which is a living tradition preserved from a time when people understood that this plant protected against illness in ways they could observe but not yet explain. Here is the part nobody talks about with rue. While the world spent decades studying aspirin as a blood-thinning intervention, this plant, that Jesus named, was sitting quietly in history, containing compounds with overlapping mechanisms that cost nothing and grow in any garden. What science has found in rue is a compound called rutin, which is one of the most extensively studied flavonoids in nutritional medicine, and it has a specific and remarkable effect on the cardiovascular system because it strengthens the walls of blood vessels, particularly the tiny capillaries that are most vulnerable to damage. Weak capillary walls are associated with bruising and varicose veins and hemorrhoids, and more seriously with the kind of microvascular damage that leads to stroke and cardiovascular disease. The European Food Safety Authority has formally evaluated rutin and recognized its role in supporting vascular health. Research has also shown rutin to have significant anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties, and it inhibits the production of inflammatory enzymes and neutralizes free radicals, which are the unstable molecules that damage cells and accelerate aging. Some researchers have also investigated rutin's potential role in preventing blood clot formation, which is a mechanism relevant to the prevention of both stroke and deep vein thrombosis. Rue is an evergreen perennial shrub that comes back year after year without replanting, and it grows to about 60 to 90 centimeters tall with distinctive blue-green leaves and small yellow flowers. It thrives in full sun and dry, well-drained soil and is exceptionally drought-tolerant once established. One important note here is that you should handle rue with gloves, particularly in bright sunlight, because the sap of rue can cause skin sensitivity when followed by sun exposure, and this does not make it dangerous as a consumed herb in normal culinary amounts, but direct skin contact during harvesting should be approached carefully. Rue also acts as a natural pest repellent in the garden, and planted near vegetables it repels aphids and beetles and certain flies, making it both medicine and garden protector in one plant. The Greeks named it after grace, and after everything science has found in it, that name feels exactly right. Herb number 2. Coriander. Exodus chapter 16, verse 31. The Israelites are in the wilderness, and God has provided manna, which is miraculous food appearing each morning on the ground. And when the Bible wants to describe what manna looked like, it reaches for one reference point that every reader would immediately understand. It was white, like coriander seed. Not like sand and not like any other small round object, but coriander seed, because this was the herb so universally grown and so present in the daily lives of the Israelite people that it was the obvious visual reference for something miraculous. God used this herb as the language of miracle, and that alone tells you everything about how central it was. What the research shows about coriander is genuinely surprising even to people who have eaten it their whole lives. The seeds contain a compound called linalool, which is a terpene alcohol that has been shown in research to have significant anxiety-reducing properties, and it does so through mechanisms that appear to interact with the same neurological pathways targeted by certain prescription anti-anxiety medications, but without their dependency risks. Animal studies have shown coriander extract to reduce anxiety behavior comparably to diazepam in some test conditions, and human research is ongoing, but the initial findings are compelling enough that pharmaceutical researchers are paying serious attention. Coriander seeds have also demonstrated powerful antimicrobial activity, and a study published in the International Journal of Food Microbiology found coriander essential oil effective against 25 different strains of bacteria, including E. coli and Salmonella and Listeria, which are 3 of the most common causes of serious foodborne illness. The researchers identified the mechanism as the disruption of bacterial cell membranes, preventing the bacteria from maintaining their structural integrity. For blood sugar management, research has shown coriander seed extract to stimulate insulin secretion and improve insulin sensitivity, adding it to the growing list of biblical herbs with direct relevance to the management of type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. Coriander is one of the fastest herbs from seed to harvest, and you can be cutting fresh leaves in as little as 3 to 4 weeks. Sow seeds directly in the ground in full sun with well-drained soil, and in hot climates coriander bolts quickly and rushes to flower and seed. Rather than fighting this, you should work with it and let some plants bolt and go to seed, and collect those seeds because they are both your next crop and your most medicinally potent harvest. The seeds store for years in a sealed jar, and you can resow every few weeks for a continuous supply of fresh leaves. Coriander also attracts beneficial insects that prey on garden pests, making it a productive companion plant throughout your garden. God chose coriander seed as the visual language for miraculous provision, and the Israelites understood immediately because this herb was everywhere. And 2,000 years later, researchers are still finding new reasons why it deserved that place in the story. Herb number 1. Garlic. We have arrived at herb number 1, and I need you to understand something before we begin. What you are about to hear is not folk medicine, and it is not tradition, and it is not cultural habit. It is one of the most comprehensively researched and most clinically validated and most scientifically documented natural compounds in the history of medicine, And it begins with one of the most emotionally raw moments in all of Scripture. Numbers chapter 11, verse 5. The Israelites have been freed from Egypt and liberated from generations of brutal slavery, and God has parted the Red Sea for them, and they are walking toward the Promised Land. And they begin to complain, and they sit and they weep. And when Moses asks what they are weeping for, here is what they say. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. They were free, and they wept for garlic. Think about what that means. These people had witnessed miracles and walked through walls of water and eaten bread that appeared from heaven each morning. And in their grief and their hunger, the thing they missed most was garlic. Not gold and not comfort and not safety, garlic. This tells you everything you need to know about how central this plant was to the ancient world, because it was not just food. It was health and strength and the thing that kept you alive and functioning and well enough to work and survive. The Egyptians fed garlic to the workers who built the pyramids not as a treat but as a performance supplement, because they understood that workers who ate garlic worked harder and stayed healthier and recovered faster. They did not have sports science, they had 10,000 years of observation. Now let us talk about what modern science has discovered. Garlic contains a compound called allicin, and allicin is one of the most studied natural compounds in the entire history of nutritional medicine, and the research on garlic is not sparse or preliminary. It is vast and rigorous, and consistent across decades of study on multiple continents. A 2016 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Nutrition reviewed 33 randomized controlled clinical trials, which is the gold standard of medical research, and it looked at the effect of garlic supplementation on cardiovascular risk markers. The findings were unambiguous because garlic supplementation significantly reduced total cholesterol and significantly reduced LDL cholesterol, which is the kind associated with arterial plaque and heart disease, and it significantly reduced blood pressure in people with elevated blood pressure. The World Health Organization has formally included garlic in its guidelines as a complementary treatment for cardiovascular disease, meaning the world's leading public health body has officially recognized what the Israelites wept for in the wilderness. Research has also shown garlic to have significant antimicrobial activity, and it is effective against bacteria and viruses and fungi and parasites, and studies have demonstrated garlic extract to be effective against strains of bacteria that are resistant to multiple conventional antibiotics. In an era of growing antibiotic resistance, this is not an academic finding. It is urgent, and it is practical. Garlic has demonstrated anti-diabetic properties, including reducing fasting blood sugar and improving insulin sensitivity, and it has shown anti-cancer properties in laboratory studies particularly relevant to stomach and colorectal cancers, and it has demonstrated the ability to reduce the duration and severity of the common cold in clinical trials. The breadth of validated effects from a single plant is almost unmatched in the natural world. But here is the single most important thing to know about garlic, and almost nobody knows this. The compound allicin does not exist in an intact garlic clove, and it is only created through a chemical reaction that occurs when the cells of garlic are crushed or chopped. When the enzyme alliinase comes into contact with a compound called alliin, this reaction produces allicin, but there is a critical timing element because this reaction needs approximately 10 minutes to complete. If you crush garlic and throw it immediately into a hot pan, the heat destroys the enzyme before allicin can fully form, and you get flavor, but you do not get medicine. The ancient practice still followed in traditional kitchens across the Middle East was to crush garlic and let it sit before cooking it. And they did not know about alliinase, but they knew that garlic prepared this way worked differently, and they could feel the difference. Science has now explained exactly why. Crush your garlic and wait 10 minutes and then cook it, because that single habit is the difference between food and medicine. Garlic is one of the most rewarding plants you can grow because of how dramatically it multiplies, and all you need to do is take a single bulb of garlic and separate it into individual cloves, and you may get 10 to 12 cloves from one bulb. Plant each clove pointed end, up about 5 centimeters deep, and 15 centimeters apart in rich, well-drained soil and water consistently, but do not waterlog the soil. In 8 to 9 months, each clove becomes a full bulb containing 10 to 12 new cloves, which means 10 cloves planted this season becomes 10 bulbs the following season, and potentially 100 or more new cloves. Within 3 seasons of growing your own garlic, you will never need to buy it again, and you will have more than your family can consume, and enough to share and to dry and to store and to replant indefinitely. The Israelites stood in the middle of a miracle and wept for this plant, and after everything science has confirmed about what garlic does to the human body, that grief makes complete sense. 2,000 years ago, people did not need a study to tell them these herbs worked because they had something more reliable. They had the consequences of being wrong. If a plant healed, it survived in the garden, and if it did not, it was forgotten. And what we have inherited in these 7 herbs is the result of thousands of years of human filtering, where only the plants that truly worked, generation after generation, made it into scripture and into tithing records and into the hands of the people who stood at the most important moments in history. And now in the 21st century, with all of our technology and all of our equipment and all of our scientific methodology, we keep arriving at the same plants and we keep confirming the same properties, and we keep discovering that the people who named these herbs as precious were not primitive. They were paying attention in a way that we have forgotten how to do. Your garden is not just a place to grow food because it is a pharmacy that has been operating for longer than recorded history, and the prescription was written thousands of years ago in a book that billions of people around the world still read every single day. The question is not whether these plants work because the science has answered that. The question is whether you are going to grow them. Tell me in the comments which of these 7 herbs surprised you the most and which one you are going to plant first, because this community is built on people who are done waiting for permission to take their health back into their own hands. If this video changed the way you see your garden, then subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because next week we are going into the plants that God specifically designed to protect your family from disease, plants that ancient healers relied on for centuries that science is only now beginning to fully understand. You do not want to miss that one. This is your garden. This is your medicine, and it has been waiting for you all along.